What do you love about America at its best, or Americans at their best? As you are writing this ideal America, and as you're reading what other people wrote and posted on the wall, somebody just shout out the emotions they're feeling. Pride. Hopeful, happy. Safe. You feel safe? Joy. Optimistic. Great. And you know, what we focus on affects our life, right? So it's nice to remember the best of what we are without being naive about the problems that we have. Now, the next exercise, in case your inner cynic has been jumping up and down and just couldn't wait, is to think not just of America when it fails to live up to its ideals, but also if you've traveled outside the United States, you may have experienced some pretty interesting stuff, right? Things you take for granted here that don't exist in other societies. And maybe you've read enough history that you can imagine societies that really didn't succeed in taking care of their citizens. So what are the negative things you think of, not necessarily about the United States, but of failed societies in general? How do you know when a society has failed? What kind of emotions come up? Sadness, disappointment, disgust, anxiety, clarity. So there's some clarity, there's some benefit to you personally in identifying a list of things you don't want our society to become, right? Did anybody feel a renewed sense of gratitude around the United States as you made this list? Yes, I feel that as well. If you've traveled overseas and you've really been fearful for your life just walking on streets, you realize the normative, not uniform, but the sort of typical American experience is you don't have to worry about going to Target. Now, I'm not going to say that's true of every neighborhood in this country, but how grateful we could be, and yet we forget to be grateful for the things that work in our society. So we don't want to let the voice of the cynic completely take over. It tends to be a drama queen, and the sky is falling and things are terrible. So sort of managing my inner drama queen is part of my daily challenge these days. Now, this Maslow's hierarchy that I have up here, most of you have probably heard of Maslow, right? Raise your hand if you've heard of Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy. The typical hierarchy of needs starts at the bottom with physiological needs, which include food, water, warmth, and rest. Food, water, warmth, and rest. It helps me to remember to be grateful for those things. We forget to be grateful for those things. Not everyone in our country has them. Most do, but not everyone. Safety needs, security and safety. It helps me to remember, for the most part, I can feel pretty secure and pretty safe. Belongingness and love needs. To the degree we have friends, to the degree we mostly get along with each other, those are things to be grateful for. Self-esteem needs are next, a feeling of accomplishment and ability to sort of be all you can be, as the sort of recruiting poster says. Not everyone has completely equal opportunities to be all they can be, but there is a lot of opportunity to be grateful for. So for that which we have, we can be grateful. And then self-actualization, achieving your full potential, and having a creative outlet. Now that's a kind of a more traditional pyramid. The extra levels that he discovered, Abraham Maslow discovered later in his life, included what you see here, the desire to know and understand. There's like a deep human need to learn. And to the degree that we have access to classes like this, universities and so on, something else to be grateful for. And a need for beauty or aesthetic needs. To the degree we have access to art, to creativity, another thing to be grateful for. And the need to self-transcend, the need to transcend our small egoic self and be a bigger person, and to have access to organizations like this one that help us to do that. Something else to be grateful for. So maybe that has expanded, and you're welcome to make notes on your piece of paper if it has, expanded how you think about what's wonderful that we can be grateful about in this country, and maybe inform some things that we could improve on. The topic is justice. What kind of America do we want? And my intention here is for myself as well to really deeply contemplate what is the future I want to help co-create in an affirmative, positive way. What is the future that I want to help co-create? This is part of the Healing the Heart of America series that we're doing here at Unity Houston. When we started back in October, when Tracy Brown was here and she and I kind of co-led a session, we talked about all the heartache in America. And we talked about what we called heartache groups, different people who had different forms of pain, who are all asking to be heard. And these heartache groups fall into a great many categories, as you can see here. There are racial and ethnic groups, Native Americans, Black Americans, Asian Americans, Latin Americans, et cetera, et cetera. We have religion issues. Muslims in particular right now are feeling very pressurized, but also Sikhs and Jews worried about their safety and worried about their rights. We have gender issues, both women's issues and feminism in general, and LGBTQ issues. Hot discussions in our culture right now. Disabled and differently abled folks, we've come a long way, we still have a long way to go. Truthfully, that's for most of these categories true. The political parties are a little tense with each other. Has anybody else noticed that? Was Thanksgiving testy for anybody? Christmas? Yeah. The holiday season in general was really difficult for some families this year, and a lot of families just had to say, we're not talking politics, because otherwise they couldn't be together. You know? So I think we're all feeling, or many of us are feeling, a real desire to bridge this pain. You know, like, how can we be friends again? How can we have conversations again and work together to create an America we'll all be proud of in the future? We also talked a little bit about economic inequality as a factor in a lot of the pressurization of the system that we're seeing, and job losses in certain sectors are certainly not helping, and other subsets of Americans, including white Americans, feeling a little scared about change happening too fast, not sure if they're being heard or demonized. So I think there's a lot of perspectives worth listening to and considering as we go forward. I wish it was easy, but it is at least simple. I think the answer is love. You can say that, but to do it, the devil's in the details, as they like to say. So it's simple in that we know we need to be loving with each other. It's hard in that there's so much complexity around it. But hopefully we can equip you a little bit with some tools to think about it. I found this quotation the other day. Never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. Isn't that beautiful? If you think of it in the converse, it makes more sense, right? How is injustice a loving society? Well, that wouldn't be, right? So a manifestation, maybe not the only one, but a manifestation of love in the public sphere would be a just society. Now we could say it should go further than that. It should be a kind society. But if it's not a just society, it's probably not going to be a kind society. So I found that helpful. We're going to be moving into using a tool called Polarity Thinking by Barry Johnson, who is absolutely brilliant, and 2 of his books are on the back table for you to look at in case you want to order them. This tool enables us to reconcile 2 things that seem to be opposite in a very constructive way. For example, who is correct, Democrats or Republicans? Is that a constructive conversation? Are we going to have any fun with that conversation? No. But what if there was a way to tease that further apart and say, here are some things that Democrats worry about and care about, and here are some things that Republicans worry about and care about, and here are some things that Libertarians worry about and care about, and here are some things the Green Party worries about and cares about, and fold those together in such a way that they move us in the direction of the ideal America you just described on the back wall. So the ideal America becomes the orienting principle by which we will work towards reconciling what appear to be opposites. And the failed society will be our indication we're headed in the wrong direction. Does that make sense? So we've sort of developed a North Pole and a South Pole right here with our first 2 exercises. I want you to be able to watch political arguments differently. you'll develop an ear to say, ah, that's the utilitarian argument, or oh, that's the libertarian argument, and here's what I like, and here's what is a weakness of that argument, and so on. So as we work through this, that's one of my goals, is that you'll be able to do that. We're going to use this idea of polarity thinking to help us envision how we can peaceably get along and tap the wisdom of each of these perspectives. Listen before we speak, and listen to understand. It's always hard to listen to understand. It's more fun to listen to debate, like I'm listening so I can win, but that's not really going to advance the cause here. Honor each person's unique experience. This is often an issue that comes up when people say, well, you just don't understand because women blah, blah, blah. Now, men, how great of an idea would it be for you to say, that's not right? If a woman says, women experience life this way, and you say, that's not right, how well is that going to go over? Not. All right. So, like in a million different ways, if I share my experience with you, it's Cindy's experience, right? It may not be your experience. So you can't assume your experience is mine, and I can't assume that mine is yours. We need to hear each other. We've had different kinds of suffering in our lives, and different kinds of joy, and learning. That's a really helpful thing. It also builds relationship, and as we're going to get to in a minute, relationship's going to be a crucial part of making this whole thing work. So what is America? We're trying to envision what kind of America do we want, but I'm big on definitions. I like to think about the words and what they mean. And so what do we mean by the word America? I came up with these 4 definitions. You can see if these are useful to you, but I don't think it's a single thing. I think America, the way we use that word, is multiple things. The first is it's a piece of geography. Right? It has certain physical boundaries on a map. It is a part of North America. So America as a bigger word includes North America, Central America, and South America, right? But the country America, which is how most of the world refers to the United States of America, has certain geography to it. So that's one thing. The second thing is, it is a set of ideals and beliefs about ourselves. And this was really driven home to me. If you were present with us last night, I talked about this. George Takei wrote his autobiography a few years ago, and he's a Japanese American. His mother was an American citizen, his father was not. When World War II happened, they and many, many other Japanese Americans were sent into internment camps. So they lost everything and they were sent away to these camps. Experiences there were pretty rough. He details a lot of what happened. We would certainly consider them to be civil rights violations. At the end of that experience, when the war was over and it was finally possible for his father to apply for American citizenship, he did. And he said to his dad, "Why are you doing this? After everything that the US military did to us in the internment camp, after how the government has treated us, why are you doing this?" And he said, "Because America is a country of ideals, and I believe in these ideals." Doesn't that just choke you up? Yeah, I know, it just gets me in the heart when I even think about that. Because he had not seen them enacted. He had every reason to be cynical about whether we seriously meant this stuff. But he believed enough in the ideals that this country was more than geography. This country was about our ideals. Which leads me to the third point. This country is a process. We are becoming American in the sense of we are becoming our ideals, bit by bit, not always in a straight line, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You can look back at our founding fathers and you can say they were visionaries. It was amazing. And at the same time, many of them owned slaves. And at that time, the only people who were allowed to vote were white male property holders. And so it was bit by bit that the vote has been expanded to include non-whites, non-property owners, and eventually in 1920, women. It's been less than 100 years, ladies. Isn't that hard to believe? Yeah. So we're not perfect, but if we look at the historical arc, things have improved. Not every single month, not every single year, but if you look at the arc, we are living closer to our ideals. And so if we think of ourselves as a work in progress, we are a process, and each one of us as citizens are part of that, that places us in a different perspective. It's not what does the country need to do for us, but what we need to do for the country, for the process to continue. Which brings me to the fourth point. America is we the people, right? We the people, the citizens of this country. And what does it mean to be a citizen is a question I am very much sitting with lately, because I have to acknowledge my own laziness. I have been actively engaged as a voter since I turned eligible. So from the first election I was eligible for, I've been actively engaged as a voter, and I've been a good student in terms of reading the issues and making thoughtful choices for whom I voted. But that was kind of the extent of my citizenship participation. And I'm not sure, in fact, I'm not sure it's enough. I am sure it's not enough. Let me rephrase that. That our engagement with each other needs to be more meaningful than showing up at the ballot box. But what does that look like is an open question for me. Now, we talked about the answer might be love. How many people thinks love is at least part of this answer? Okay, I think everybody. All right, so if you think love is at least part of this answer, then it's important that we think about what do we mean by the word love. Love in the English language is a very sloppy word. We say, I love my children and I love ice cream. Those are not the same thing. So how do we talk about the kind of love we're talking about? And the definition that I created for myself for spiritual intelligence was informed by this parable, which I found from the Eastern traditions. And this parable says that love is a bird with two wings. One wing is compassion, the other wing is wisdom. If either wing is broken, the bird cannot fly. Isn't that stunning? Yeah. The best of the heart, compassion, the best of the mind, wisdom, have to come together or you will not have loving action. Can you imagine that you could be kind, believing that you're being compassionate, and actually make the situation worse? Yes. Is it possible to be an expert in a subject and to be technically correct, but to execute your answer with no care and concern and make the situation worse? Of course. So once you kind of think about it, it makes sense. So from there, I came up with this definition, and spiritual intelligence is kind of my field for those of you who don't know me. And this is how I define it, that spiritual intelligence is the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace regardless of the situation. It is, for me, a description of the spiritual exemplars we so admire, like Martin Luther King, Jesus, Gandhi, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, pick them. Not to say those people all were perfect, but that at their best, this was the behavior. And so for me, this is the behavior that I would like to live up to. And I like to say, I don't know how many minutes I have of it in a day, but if I can have even a few minutes of being at this level every day, that would be great. And hopefully more minutes rather than less. So what do these particular words mean? The word compassion for me is best illustrated in this hierarchy. At the bottom we have antipathy, which means I don't like you even though I don't know you. I just think you're garbage, forget it. You voted for that other candidate, I can't possibly like you. And there's a whole lot of that. I used to have a 4-level hierarchy, but I added antipathy in the last 2 years because we've been so busy being angry at each other without even knowing each other. Like, this is not a personal thing. This is like, I don't need to know you. If you believe X, I hate you, right? So antipathy at the bottom. Who would think that it would be a step up to become apathetic about each other? Could we please just get to neutral? Getting to a place where we can dispassionately calm ourselves down and listen is actually a really important step. When you're fear activated, when the limbic system's running the show, to calm down. That's really important. Then we move to the next level, which is sympathy in this hierarchy. And the way I think of sympathy is I am finally noticing your suffering. I've moved from apathy to sympathy, but there's a little bit of that feeling of pity about it. Superior, inferior. I'm okay, you're not okay. But it does bother me that you're not okay. I'm at least noticing that you're not okay. I would like you to get out of my space so I don't have to be annoyed by this so much, so maybe I'll write you a check, or I'll write a check to Goodwill or the Red Cross, but it's like, at least I've noticed you're suffering. This is developmentally an improvement. Seriously, it is. It's a big improvement. And then we get to empathy, and empathy is a true peer-to-peer relationship where your suffering is my suffering. I feel it in my body. When you are aggrieved and you are suffering injustice, I feel it as if it happened to me. Developmentally, a huge advance. What's the problem with too much empathy, though? It's exhausting. It's exhausting. You can get so overwhelmed that you shut down and retreat from situations where you could be of service because you just can't handle the energetic overload anymore, which is where the next level, compassion, comes from. Compassion in the Buddhist studies, what we're seeing from functional MRIs, is that people trained in compassion meditation move beyond empathy. So this is keeping all the beauty of empathy with a couple of exceptions, one of which is they deactivate the distress circuit of the brain so that they can be present to suffering without feeling personally threatened by it. And second, the motor neuron center of the brain gets activated. They want to do something. So it's an active engagement with the suffering of the world while not feeling personally overwhelmed. I'm all for that, right? So that's something we can all work on developing over time. So that's what we mean by compassion. Wisdom. At the bottom here is sort of the beginnings of the thinking mind, is sort of understanding that there is such a thing as an objective reality that we can try to scientifically explore. And as we scientifically explore it, we gather data. And as we analyze that data over time, we develop information from that data. Oh, we notice these patterns, and then we offer hypotheses about what these patterns mean. And over time of working with different hypotheses and different information in real world feedback loops, we develop knowledge, which is great. But knowledge is not enough. I often kind of joke, like, people who only focus on knowledge often end up needing executive coaches if they're working in corporations because they don't know how to deal with people. And truthfully, that was me in my 20s. So I can't criticize too much because that was my go-to Myers-Briggs thinking style thing. But knowledge is not enough. What's the next level? The next level is wisdom. And wisdom requires a profound understanding of the whole story of what's going on, not just my own limited data set. And it includes tapping into the compassion side. So it's a wisdom equals head and heart kind of combination. But you can think of it as the most complete aspect of the thinking mind, and compassion the most complete aspect of the feeling side. Now, I'm going to teach a little metaphor here, which is a fabulous metaphor for everything we're going to do going forward. And it's a metaphor called the elephant and the rider. It was popularized by Jonathan Haidt, who is the author of the Righteous Mind book, fabulous book, which I'll be teaching at the Jung Center in April. And he's really interested in moral decision making. Like, how do we decide what is just and what is unjust, and how do we sort of enact our concepts of justice? Now, we like to believe we're rational. There is no research to support that. There is no rational research to support that we make rational decisions. We do occasionally let our neocortex or our analytical mind make the choices for us, but for the most part, we don't. So the metaphor he's using here of the elephant and the rider is that the elephant is the part of the brain that's actually controlling us. So this is not a symbol for any political party. This is a symbol for size and power. The size and power of the part of our brain that is actually making the decisions is the elephant. And that is not our higher brain functions. This is our limbic system, our emotional and intuitive brain centers. Up here is this little rider. That's the logical mind. So how well do you think the logical mind can control the elephant? Not so well. And so his interesting observation is that we make decisions from our gut, from our intuition, from our emotions, from our biases, and then we rationalize them. So the writer's job is public relations. Isn't that great? So the elephant, our older brain structures, the rider, our logical mind, The great majority of the time, and especially when we are upset, the elephant is running the show and the rider is apologizing for the elephant. Saying, I'm sorry I just trampled your house. I'm sorry I ruined Thanksgiving dinner. I'm really sorry about whatever, but you know I'm right. And that's the rider's job. I'm right because you're wrong, and so it apologizes for even using twisted, convoluted logic that makes your brain explode. You listen to somebody else explaining their elephant and you go, what is wrong with that person? But if you could hear your rider explaining you, you'd go, what is wrong with me? It's like, so it kind of helps to normalize that and know that we all do that. And it is effortful to be logical. It takes effort. It's a worthy pursuit, because if we really want to create a just society, I think we need to use our neocortex. But that means we have to manage our limbic system, because otherwise the elephant starts running off with us. What his book talks about is the rider or logic can influence the elephant to the degree that things are calm and not rushed. So a setting like this, calm, safe, not rushed, is a time when the rider is more likely to be able to influence your thought process and your decision-making process. The other thing that influences the elephant is relationships that matter. I heard a speaker at Rice University a few months ago, Peter Railston, I think his name was, who is a moral philosopher, but uses a lot of neuroscience and a lot of moral psychology in his work, and talking about why he thinks the mood in the country shifted so quickly relative to gay marriage, equal marriage. And he said his opinion and the opinion of other people in the field was that so many people came out of the closet that everybody knew somebody and cared about somebody who was affected by this issue. And it stopped being philosophical and theoretical, and it started being personal. It wasn't about denying, in theory, marriage to some people I've never met. It was about keeping Dan from getting married or Mary from getting married. And you care about those people. And now you're placed in a position of, wow, which is more important, my attachment to that belief or my attachment to this person? And if the attachment to the person is more important, then the belief shifted. Isn't that fascinating? Yeah. We've also learned from safety training. I used to work at Exxon for many years, and we cared a great deal about influencing people's behaviors. And one of the things we learned from the implementation of seatbelts is that people's beliefs will change after their behaviors change sometimes. So when seatbelts were required by law, and everybody had to buckle up, do you remember initially people were griping, I don't like them, they're uncomfortable, they're not necessary, I won't be able to get out of my car if I'm in a wreck, blah, blah, blah. Now, how many people would tell their children, don't buckle up? I mean, the data finally caught up with us. The emotional resistance to using seatbelts eventually was overwhelmed both by the pattern of using them and the radical change in death occurrences in car accidents. And so over time, people change their opinions given that they have changed their behaviors. So there's multiple ways we can kind of help ourselves to see things differently and help maybe to shift the society. But we need to not think we're going to logic people into new positions. All right? And a lot of times we engage in Facebook diatribes, throwing statistics at each other. I would say take someone to coffee instead. All right. Now, in the book, which we have agreed to use for the class, this book, just to give you a little background, is by this professor, Michael J. Sandel, who's been teaching at Harvard for a very long time. And you can tell he's been teaching for a long time by how good his stories are. Like, he's really found great examples to illustrate his cases. From his perspective, and this is a key point in the book, the ethics of virtue has been underrepresented in the conversations about what is the just thing to do. So maximizing welfare, maximizing freedom are typical arguments that we make, but maximizing virtue is a conversation that we haven't had, or at least not as often. So the themes, he says, in modern times have been more around the welfare of people, and the focus is often on prosperity. Frequently it's focusing more on economics, but a few philosophers will acknowledge there's more to the common welfare than just money. Arguments will focus around freedom, my rights, My individual rights do not ever impinge on my rights unless there is some crying real need to do so. And then the ancient theories of virtue, and what do we honor? To ask whether a society is just is to ask how it distributes the things we prize: income and wealth, duties and rights, powers and opportunities, offices and honors. A just society distributes these goods in the right way. It gives each person his or her due. The hard questions begin when we ask what people are due and why. Right. So, welfare, freedom, and virtue is the theme of the book. All right, some definitions of terms, because I think it's helpful. Justice, as we're using it in this class, is going to be the system of laws and the system of systems. It doesn't even have to be laws, but the system of systems, formal and informal. Are they morally correct or fair? Fairness, what does that mean? It's the quality of treating people equally or in a way that is right or reasonable. Treating people equally is quite the challenge, right? And equality in all circumstances can also cause problems. But the idea of equality being a factor and justice wearing a blindfold, you may have seen most of the statues of justice are a woman holding a scale, blindfolded, and in the other hand is a sword. And the scales are to balance the various arguments being presented. The blindfold is so that I won't make a different decision for you just because you're male or female, black or white, Native American or not, that I will make this decision fairly. And the sword is the power to stand with that and enact that justice. So something about equality is really important in our American consciousness, wouldn't you say? Yeah, it's one of our core values, and yet it's a very tricky thing to enact because sometimes not treating people the same is the best way to treat them. So like, how do you figure that out? Now, when we get into arguing about specific cases, one of the things we're going to talk about is who deserves what, and the word merit will come up. Merit as a reward system inside companies, for example, decides who gets promotion. Who gets promoted is based on what we assume are the qualities and traits we want to reward, some of which are specific behaviors, some of which may be more like virtuous traits. But there is a whole lot of assumptions made about what we should reward. And there's a fascinating conversation in the book, in the first chapter, about the Purple Heart. And should veterans who have PTSD be awarded the Purple Heart for having received a war wound? And the argument made by one of the veterans organizations was no. If you don't bleed, you don't get the medal. Now that creates an interesting conversation. Whichever side of that you land on, what does the medal serve to reward? What are we honoring? What is meritorious in that situation? So it's never as easy as we think it is, right? So how do we put love into action? Hopefully with spiritual intelligence, wisdom, compassion, peace. And nonviolence is part of that peace thing. So in your handout, you have a printout from the King Center, which lists the principles of nonviolence. And I will go through these because I think they're really a crucial part of our commitment collectively to creating a just society. Nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. So we often associate courage with the courage to fight, but what if the courage is not fighting, non-violence? You can resist without being violent, and what does that look like? And of course, we owe a great debt to Gandhi, who informed Martin Luther King in the formation of these principles. Nonviolence is nonviolent resistance to evil, and he makes an important distinction about not going after people, but going after the ideas that are unjust and the systems that are unjust. So nonviolence is resistance to evil. It is very hard work. It is spiritual, mental, and emotional work, and often physical as well. So being good advocates for a more just society will require a lot of us. It will be demanding. Second, nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. Isn't that beautiful? There have been a couple of stories circulating on the internet, which if there are any video clips, I'll try and find one for next week. One was of a story of a Jewish student at college who was attending college with the son of a white supremacist and out in the open, complete advocate for white supremacy. This young man had been raised in that belief system and advocated for that belief system. This Jewish student noticed that this young white male had no friends. Now, can you imagine he might be isolated on a college campus? He invited him over repeatedly to come and hang and play pool and, just do whatever college students do with his friends. Over the period of months, eventually that young man renounced white supremacy and became an advocate for its polar opposite, that it is time for us to accept each other as human beings. It's an inspiring story. Now, did he go after the rider or did he go after the elephant? He went after the elephant. He built a friendship. There is another very inspiring story of an African-American man who's been instrumental in getting 200 KKK members to renounce their membership by building personal relationships. So I'll see if I can find a video clip on either of those to watch, but it comes back to what is wise and compassionate to do in the world. Yelling at each other and calling people names like racist and sexist and whatever generally does not work. Right? So if we're interested in what works to create the ideal America, this is a crucial part of understanding how we're going to do that. So here we have Gandhi and Martin Luther King understanding nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. The purpose of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, which is a beautiful phrase. The idea being that it's a just community where we really take care of each other. Number 3, nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. I think that's such a helpful reframe. This is not about defeating a particular political party or about winning a debate over another person. It's about finding the higher both and solution. Fourth, nonviolence holds that suffering can educate and transform. Here the belief is that unearned suffering, like people who are protesting peacefully, who have fire hoses and dogs turned on them, can be transformed personally by their commitment to stand for what they believe, and that people who see that can be transformed. And I think many of us who can remember back to the 60s when some of that was happening, those images on television changed people. So the commitment to nonviolence is tremendously courageous, and it can include personal suffering. 5, nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. There's that famous MLK quote where he says, "I think I'll choose love. Hate is too heavy a burden to carry." And it is a heavy burden, isn't it? Anger and hate is just a horrible thing to carry. And then finally, nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice, that God is a God of justice. Evolution, the universe, however language you like, is bending in the direction of things getting better. It doesn't happen without us making it happen. We have to be part of it, and it's not guaranteed. We can go backwards. But the universe is not unjust, is his way of saying it. The universe leans towards justice, and we just have to put our shoulder behind that effort. Isn't that beautiful? All right, so now we're going to get to our final segment for today, which is to talk about polarity thinking and how to make all of this a reality. And of course, it starts with each of us in our own hearts and coming to grips with the fact that we're not 100% right. Can you handle that? It's awful. I'm not 100% right. That's terrible. All right. And here's the tool that's going to help you see that you're not 100% right. We're going to use this a lot, so we're going to practice with it, but I'm going to illustrate with a very simple illustration to begin. This is Barry Johnson's work on polarity thinking, and this is his way of mapping it. If you think about these two opposites, inhale and exhale, which one is better? You need both. Why do you need both? To stay alive, right. So here you see staying alive is the North Pole. If you want to successfully continue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, please inhale and exhale. This is not an either or problem, okay? So you want to be able to do both. If you fail to do that, you will be down here at the South Pole, which is dead, all right? So North Pole is shown in green, South Pole is shown in red, and then you have these two poles, which are neutral terms. It's really important that these be positioned with neutral words. Good and evil is not a polarity, right, in this sense. In this sense, the two poles are both important and necessary. I don't believe evil is necessary, okay? So we don't have to pulse between good and evil. I've been good, so now I can be evil, you know. Cheating on the diet might be different. I've been good, now I can cheat, I can be good, but inhaling and exhaling are two neutral, interdependent, positive poles. All right, so they're both important in the positive sense, meaning they're necessary. Now, how you write this out is the up above the line is considered the positive expression of that pole, and below the line is considered the negative expression of the pole. Comes from overusing it. So up here, bringing in oxygen is the good thing that you get from inhaling. If you inhale and you hold it, and hold it, and hold it, because you're vehemently opposed to exhaling as a philosophy, you will begin to experience carbon dioxide buildup, which will force you to eventually exhale to get it out. So the exhalation releases carbon dioxide, but if you exhale and refuse to inhale, over time you will suffer oxygen deprivation. So this becomes a moving system, never-ending moving system until you die. It keeps moving. And there's no midpoint. Sometimes people get confused with this and they think it's like, you know, on a seesaw, but if you just stood in the middle, everything would be balanced. It won't work in this kind of a system, because if you stop with your lungs halfway full, what happens? You still die, right? So the idea is we need them both. We really need them both. And so many of these political variables, these justice variables that we're going to be looking at, each side is necessary. And if either side won, it would not be good, right? We would get the negative of that expression. Should you take care of yourself, or should you take care of other people? Up here, what's the benefit of taking care of others? Up here, what's the benefit on this side, right, of taking care of self? On the lower left, what happens if you only take care of other people? What happens? And over here, what happens if you only take care of yourself? So what's the value of taking care of other people? Let's look at it in the context of a business, which I often am doing these polarity maps in business coaching, consulting situations, and we say, all right, you want to be a highly emotionally and spiritually intelligent leader. Is there an advantage of taking care of other people? People feel seen and loved, trust is built, team is engaged, right? This would be true in a family as well, wouldn't it? That in a family setting, other people would feel seen and loved, and you're building trust as you're taking care and doing things for others, and the family feels like a solid unit. Over here, what's the advantage of taking care of yourself? Well, I can set good boundaries with other people. I learn how to say no. Anybody ever have trouble saying no? I learned to take care of myself for the long-term effectiveness of my team or my family, my life, and you become a role model of balance for your family members or for your team members. What we tend to have a blind spot around, if you love the pole of taking care of other people, we tend to see the two blue squares. And if you prefer taking care of yourself, you'll tend to see the two white squares. The challenge is to see the squares you're least likely to see. So let me assume that a lot of the people in here will lean in the direction of caring for others too much. I find that often in spiritual communities, that people are wonderfully kind-hearted and will just wear themselves out taking care of other people. You will see the upper left, that when you do that, other people feel seen, you're making a difference, you might have those kind of things up there. On the lower right, you will fear being perceived as selfish. that would be like one of the worst things somebody could say to you is how selfish of you, right? You will not want to see the degrading of your relationships by being selfish. If I only take care of myself, nobody will like me, I won't have good relationships, my family members won't like me, whatever, and relationships will degrade. So you'll tend to see the two blue boxes. People who are more focused on self will tend to be good at setting boundaries and saying no, but they will maybe not see that they sometimes come across as selfish. What they will fear is the over-caring downside. So the over-caring downside is exhaustion, having nothing left to give. If you're in a corporate setting, I've had bosses saying it's turning into a therapy center around here. Everybody's taking care of everybody else's feelings. Nobody's getting any work done. So it's like loss of focus on goals might be a business concern when we're too busy taking care of each other. In a family, if I'm too busy as a parent taking care of my children, I may deplete myself to the point where I get sick and I can't take care of anybody. Does that make sense? Right. So when you realize which pole you favor, you'll realize which two boxes you see and which two you can't see. Does that make sense? And this is going to be the secret to everything else that we do for the next 3 weeks of trying to understand what's the and, where is the and in all of this. Take care of other people and take care of myself. If you handle this well, you end up with this lovely infinity loop. Isn't that beautiful? As soon as it drop below the line, time to go above the line on the other side. Drop below the line, go above the line on the other side, and back and forth. Polarities as they are constructed here are different from problems. Problems can be solved. Polarities never go away. They are indestructible, like inhaling and exhaling. You can't get rid of them. You have to learn how to work with them. Problems, on the other hand, have particular solutions. There's an answer or a set of answers to fix the problem. They can be analyzed by a scientific method. What's the best way to build a bridge across the Mississippi River at this point where the current flows at this speed? That's an engineering problem. That's a problem that you can solve. There's no pulsing between options when you're solving problems. So one of the tricks to this is trying to discern on any given social justice issue, is this a problem to be solved or a polarity to be managed? Essentially, you learn how to sense when you flow below the line and then shift to the other side above the line. Sense you've gone below the line again, shift to the other side again. Now, being good Americans, creating the ideal America, is going to be the North Pole that we'll be operating from in this class. So you can put various things up there, like being a good citizen or creating the ideal America as the positive outcome. The green box is why we bother with the headache of this. Like, it would be so much easier to just feel right and go home. I'm right, you're wrong, I'm going back to my bedroom and hide. But if we're going to solve it, we have to get over it, and this is the reason we bother. It's the reason we put the courageous effort into understanding different perspectives. And whatever the red box is what is undermining our higher purpose, a failed society, an unjust society, whatever you want to put in that box. And we're going to put different things in the left box and the right box. One of the big debates that's up in our country right now is who's responsible for health care. And we'll probably use that as an illustration as we go through, not because there is a single right answer, because I think if it were easy, we would have done it by now. This is a very complicated, multifactorial problem, which has polarities throughout it. So it is a situation with a lot of complexity, but one of them is who's responsible for my health care? Am I, or are we collectively responsible? And that individual versus collective dynamic affects a whole lot of our policy conversations. Is this an either or a both and? I would argue it's an and. There are times when it's collective, there are times when it's individual, and you have to know when to pulse between the two. So we'll look at others that we might need to consider, and this is just a partial list. I've been working a running list at my desk at home. Taking care of myself, taking care of others, my rights being protected, your rights being protected. Individual and collective responsibility, stability, don't change anything versus change. You can change too fast, right? And disrupt everything. You can be stable for too long and everybody's just, it's ridiculous, get with the times. So it's kind of like, how much stability, how much change can we handle? Freedom and regulation. Businesses want less regulation, environmentalists want more. What's the right answer? These are complicated questions. Should we decentralize or should we centralize? Yes. Should we use hard power or should we use soft power? Depends on the context, depends on the situation. If you use one for too long, you get the downside. And I'll explain what I mean by these terms over the coming days. But hard power is essentially military power and brute force. Soft power is economic sanctions, persuasion, just diplomacy, things like that. Should we be tough or should we be tender? If you've raised a child, you know this dilemma, right? Should I nurture and coddle and tell my little sweetheart that everything's going to be okay? Or should I let him or her deal with the bruised knee and the broken friendship and toughen up? Do you ever see this argument between parents? Yeah. And this is not an either or either. This is one of those yes in right dosages. There's a time to be tough, there's a time to be tender. And we have that conversation politically as well. You know, you soft-hearted liberals, you hard whatever Republicans, like that conversation. What if both sides are partially right? And in what contexts are they correct? It's an interesting question. And then honesty and tact. This is exactly how Barry Johnson words it. I did not make this up. Honesty or candor, blunt speaking, versus tact or careful speaking or kindness. Which do we need? Both in the right circumstances. All right? Why are we bothering to think about things like governance and justice? And here's kind of a nice quotation from Martin Luther King that I very much like. Power, and politics is in part the exercise of power, justice is in part the exercise of power. Without love, power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. Isn't that fabulous? Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands in the way of love. May it so be.